All right, welcome back. Hour number 2 here on this Tuesday. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you. One Bills Live. Pleased to be joined now by ESPN NFL senior writer and reporter Mike Clay, joining us on the show with his famed projections, which are already out for 2024. Mike, thanks for joining us first and foremost. We'll kind of dive into the nuts and bolts of your Bills projections. The one that maybe jumped out at me the most, I would have to say, is the Democratic or communal distribution of receiving touchdowns in the receiving corps. My question to you is, I'm sure you've had this happen to you before with your team-by-team projections. When you have a team that had the roster turnover like the Bills had at the receiver position, what is your general approach there when you're dealing with a lot of unknowns, despite what your algorithms and analytics might say?
Yeah, how about one word? Hedging. That's the word here. A lot of unknowns. You guys nailed it on the head. I mean, you bring in Keon Coleman, and what the range of outcomes for a guy like that is very wide. We've seen it from these young wide receivers, first rounders, second rounders. Sometimes they step in and they're immediate stars, heavy target shares, especially guys picked early in the first round. But recently, in the last decade, we've seen second rounders do something similar. So it could be that, or Keon, look, there's probably a 60% chance he's not going to be very good based on the odds if you just look at the hit rate for wide receivers and in the NFL draft. So that has to be accounted for as well. So I do him with 96 targets. I have him with a pretty solid rookie season. I think if he comes away with 59 for over 800 yards and 5 touchdowns, you're probably feeling pretty good about the trajectory of his career. But I'm also not projecting him to replace, Stefon Diggs or have a big time season like that. Same kind of thing. Curtis Samuel's a short range guy. He's going to run the ball. He's going to see a lot of short to intermediate targets. Not going to be used a ton near the goal line. Right now, I have Khalil Shakir as the 3, which is obviously going to limit his statistical upside a bit. And then Dalton Kincaid's a tricky one. I mean, could this guy score 7, 8, 9 touchdowns in this offense? Absolutely. But guys, he wasn't used near the goal line last year. That was a really bizarre thing. They just didn't get him the ball in that area. Maybe that changes this year, but it didn't happen last year. So obviously that's baked a bit into the projections.
Yeah, and you talk about the projections for these guys. Keon Coleman's coming into a situation where he's got an elite quarterback and a total void at the top of the wide receiver chain. Gabe Davis, Steph Diggs vacate the building, so they need somebody to take over those targets. Now, certainly Kincaid, Cook, Shakir, all of those guys can factor into that, but that makes it doubly hard to get a handle on how good these guys might be. The high end, you're right, maybe, a 1,100-yard season and 85, 90 catches, but it also might be what you said, down less than 50 catches and 600 or 800 yards. It's the situation that each of these guys goes to really says as much about whether they can play as the guy's own ability.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget, the Bills, Stefon Diggs, Gabe Davis, all of the pass catchers, even Dawson Knox in this offense over the past, we'll say 5 years during the Josh Allen era, have benefited from not only a high-scoring offense, but an extremely pass-heavy offense, especially over the last 3 or 4 years. We saw a switch flipped when they switched to Joe Brady last season. They went to a run-first offense that took away some pass volume for Josh Allen. Now, he still lit up the stat sheet with rushing touchdowns. I don't know if anyone, most people realize he had as many rushing touchdowns last year as Jalen Hurts. There's all of that talk about the brotherly shove. I mean, Josh Allen had the same number of rushing touchdowns as Hurts. So he still delivered, but a lot more of the damage was done on the ground. And they might not change off of that. Now I'm projecting more of a balanced offense, kind of in the middle of where they were. But they could keep running the ball if it's working. It did down the stretch last season. They were still scoring. And now you don't have those experienced receivers in Davis and Diggs. So I would not be surprised if they at least come out early in the season to try to run the football.
All right, so let's elaborate on that a little bit, because we saw James Cook blow up for over almost 1,600 total yards from scrimmage last year, but you have his numbers a little bit below that from where they were last year. So are you anticipating more of a shared volume out of the backfield? I mean, Ray Davis is a guy that a lot of people are already projecting to be a vulture touchdown guy down around the goal line because of his thick, compact build. Does that mean fewer rushing touchdowns for Josh Allen? Based on your projections, I would say yes. So maybe just talk to us about your formula in kind of projecting that running back room now with the new kid, Ray Davis, there too.
Yeah, some of it is a little bit of regression to the mean in the efficiency department. It's really just so hard to sustain elite levels of efficiency. I mean, you look across the division, Devon Achane and Miami, same kind of thing. I'm not going to project him for 8 yards per carry. It's going to be closer to maybe 4.5. So there's an element of that in here. Also, Cook coming, we'll see if this is problematic long term, but some concerns about if he has the size to be a feature back in the NFL. Is he going to be a Saquon Barkley, a Josh Jacobs, someone like that, a Jonathan Taylor? Probably not, but he's really good as a pass catcher. So I do have him projected for 49 catches, which is a pretty big number. And one other element I would point out here is that injuries are so prominent in the NFL. We know that. It's so hard to pinpoint who's going to get hurt. So I kind of use a blanket injury rate. So for Cook, for example, I have him projected for, 1,300 yards, 260 touches. That's in 14 games. So if he holds up better than that, of course, I'd be projecting a little bit more than that. But don't get me wrong. Love Cook. Think he's super skilled. Think he came into his own in the second half last season. This is a good offense. I'm expecting him to be very productive this year.
And the division that the Bills play in with the Jets, Patriots, Dolphins, it's interesting because they've almost got the entire rainbow of quarterback play in it. You've got the 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers. You've got the guy in Josh Allen who's right in his prime. You've got Tua, who is chasing both of those guys kind of in the stand. Although, the Dolphins were close to winning the division last year, Tua has got some weapons around him. And then, of course, the brand new guy fresh out of the wrapper, and Drake May. How do you think that is going to affect this race down the stretch and the way this division plays out?
Yeah, so it's a well-timed question because we're about to get the NFL schedule, so I've been working on that. And something that I know, of course, we have the opponents already, just not the order of games, but something that jumped out to me is that the AFC East, once again, is a very tough schedule that applies on both sides of the ball, especially to the offenses, though, because they have very good defenses in this division. But, we expect the Bills to be a playoff contender once again. Even if their roster, had some transition this year. Miami, same thing. They've been fading late in the season, but they've been so good early on. They're going to be a contender. And then, honestly, I know the listeners aren't going to want to hear this, but I am very high on the Jets this year. I mean, they objectively are stacked across the board. So it really comes down to what you think of Aaron Rodgers. Do you think he's over the hill? Do you think he's still the same guy that won the MVP 2 years in a row, a couple of years ago? You could pick your lane, but honestly, they need an average quarterback to be one of the better teams in the league and certainly a playoff contender. So that's three really good teams. New England's defense is fine. Obviously, they're rebuilding offensively, so I'm not too worried about them. But overall, this is a tough schedule, one of the toughest in the NFL, and I think that could limit the Bills' offensive output a little bit. One other point I'd make here is, look, I get it. They have Josh Allen. They're going to be a contender as long as Josh Allen is upright, not to mention Sean McDermott, who's one of the best defensive minds in the NFL. But last year, who's the best offense in the NFL the last 5 or so years? The Chiefs, right? They've been a powerhouse. They have Patrick Mahomes. They have Andy Reid. They fell all the way to 10th last year in offensive EPA. It was a big dip for them because they had some concerns at wide receiver. Similar kind of deal here in Buffalo this year. It's uncertain. So would not surprise me with the tough schedule, the turnover on offense, the turnover on defense, if the Bills take a little bit of a step back this season. But again, at the end of the day, you have Josh Allen, you have Sean McDermott, you're going to be in the thick of it in the AFC.
Right. Flipping it over to Buffalo's defense a little bit, it's a team that finished top 5 in sacks with 54. No Leonard Floyd anymore, who had 10.5 last year. We still don't know if we're going to see the Von Miller of old this season. And outside of Javon Solomon, who they drafted on day 3, who we don't even know what his role might be if he's on the 53-man roster, I understand why you only project them at 40 sacks. Did you take into account at all not knowing who the defensive play caller is going to be either? Because that's still up in the air right now as to whether it's going to be McDermott or new DC Bobby Babich.
Yeah, not a big variable there. The larger variable is just the turnover. A lot of big names, especially in the secondary, are gone from this group. I actually kind of, I still like the cornerback room, though. Rasul Douglas is very underrated. Christian Benford has been solid. Teron Johnson, maybe the best nickel in the NFL. So I still like the cornerback room for sure. I like the off-ball linebacker group led by Matt Milano, assuming he's healthy this year. But otherwise, yeah, there are some concerns. I mean, depth concerns up front on the interior Edge rusher, absolutely. I'm with you. I have Von Miller projected for around 400 snaps. I don't think at his age he's going to play more than he did last season. So they need some veterans to pan out. They don't really have high pedigree youth behind the starters there. And then at safety, again, transition there with Rapp and Edwards. So and not to mention Bishop, who they just brought in. So definitely some concerns on defense. I don't think on paper they have a top 10 defense right now. But I've said that before about them, and Sean McDermott always seems to maximize these guys. I mean, I don't know if we talk enough about what he did with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. I mean, Poyer was a journeyman, a backup. Micah Hyde was, he played a lot in Green Bay. He was a nickel. He played some safety, but he hadn't really found his own in the NFL until he got to Buffalo, and then he becomes an all-pro. I mean, are you kidding me? So we've seen this from McDermott before. I'm not going to doubt him, and I'm not going to doubt this defense, but definitely a new look to this unit.
One of the things that happened last year with Sean McDermott as defensive coordinator after taking over for Leslie Frazier, the defense probably was ranked a little less high. It was a top 3 defense with Leslie Frazier year in, year out, but it was rarely spectacular. Under Sean McDermott, they weren't ranked as highly, but they seemed to be more timely in their ability to make plays at a time when they needed them. It seemed to be
more sacks.
Yeah, it seemed to be more effective of a defense, even though it wasn't ranked as highly. Now, Bobby Babich takes over as defensive coordinator. How much credence is there into having perhaps, we don't know who's going to call the defensive plays, but if it is a new defensive play caller, how does that affect, particularly since nobody knows how Bob Babich is going to call this game? So how does that affect the projections? I mean, that is an enormous question mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think you answered your own question, which is we don't know. We don't know yet. I don't have enough background on him to make substantial moves. But again, I did boost this unit for McDermott's presence. I mean, whether he's calling plays or not, he has a lot of say on that side of the football. He oversees it. He's obviously a genius defensive mind. Just again, what he has done over the years has been incredible. So yeah, I mean, I didn't tweak for the potential play caller at all right now. I don't know if it necessarily moves the needle. I'm going to lean heavily into McDermott, heavily into the recent history of this defense, and certainly to the personnel that's on the field.
Last thing, Mike, from me, Josh Allen, as far as your fantasy rankings go, he's at the top of your quarterback list. I believe me, I get it. I get why, because the guy uses his legs and is practically a running back wrapped inside a quarterback. So you almost get a 2-for-1 deal by selecting him for a fantasy football team. Do you think there is any reason to be concerned that, and I know you tend to lean towards regressing to the mean, that touchdown rushing total is going to come down this year?
Yeah, I do. I have him projected for 8 across 15 games this season. And let's be clear. 8 rushing touchdowns is a huge number for a quarterback. Also have him around 500 rushing yards. So you said it. Still atop the fantasy rankings. Still an absurdly high projection for Josh Allen. I'm expecting another terrific season. So, yeah, look, could he take a step back as a passer? Yeah, it's possible. We've seen it before where his efficiency has dipped, and obviously the supporting cast is a little bit differently, and they're not as pass heavy. So that's possible. But unlike someone like Patrick Mahomes, who wasn't as good in fantasy last year when the offense dropped off, Josh Allen, to your point, will run the ball so much that he'll make up for that from a statistical perspective. So no doubt about it. If you play fantasy, you want Josh Allen on your team, no doubt about it.
Mike, thanks so much for spending some time with us. Really appreciate it.
You got it, guys. Anytime.